This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. U.S. President Trump endorses Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi 2 days before a national election, calling her strong and wise. Polls point to a landslide victory and a date in the White House in March. Now, Toyota's chief steps down in a surprise reshuffle after the leading Japanese automaker reported a slump in profit amid headwinds from Trump's tariffs and from increasing competition with Chinese rivals. The UN Security Council reportedly approves exemptions for humanitarian aid to North Korea. More than a dozen projects led by South Korea and other international groups were cleared after months of delays. Well, aid may be cleared on paper, but Pyongyang tightens the screws at home. A UN human rights official says it's now nearly impossible to leave the state as a regime uses facial recognition and other tech to ramp up surveillance. From viral stationery to sold-out handbags, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is emerging as an unlikely youth icon, a buzz that could make a difference at the ballot box. Well, less than 2 days to go before Japan heads to the polls. Ahead of that, U.S. President Donald Trump gave his public endorsement of Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. In an online post, President Trump praised Ms. Takaichi as a strong and wise leader who deserves powerful recognition for the job she and her coalition are doing. He added that it is his honor to give her a complete and total endorsement. Mr. Trump also confirmed of a White House meeting with Ms. Takaichi on March 19th. It would be the Japanese leader's first ever visit to the U.S. as Prime Minister. Tokyo, in response to the upcoming trip, said that Ms. Takaichi intends to open a new chapter in the U.S.-Japan alliance. The government, however, did not comment on Mr. Trump's support. Well, opinion polls suggest Ms. Takaichi is headed for a landslide win. One survey by Nikkei Asia forecasts the ruling coalition, made up of the Liberal Democratic Party and the Japan Innovation Party, to win big, securing more than 300 or some 60% of the 465 lower house seats, while the centrist Reform Alliance could see its current 167 seats cut to about half. It says LDP candidates are seen as top picks in more than 40% of single-seat districts, while also leading in 70% of the competitive districts. While the figures appear promising, some voters have expressed concerns over Ms. Takaichi's handling of rising cost of living.
満足ではないですね。税金がちょっと引かれすぎてるかなというところはありますね。手取りの金額がすごい低いですし、日本もいろんな税引かれるんですけども、消費税がもう最たるものだと思うんですけども、ものすごい引かれて、ちょっと国民のその生活を圧迫してるかなっていうところは正直あります。
高市首相自体は支持します。ただ、その消費税のですね、減税についてはですね、本来だったらヨーロッパでやってるようなですね、軽減税率、あれをそもそも最初からそういう形で導入すべきだったのをですね、ちょっと中途半端なですね、あまり意味のない消費軽減税率という名前だけですけどね。だからそれがいろいろ問題があるんじゃないかなと思います。
A political gambit? Well, less than 2 years since Japan's last lower house election, Sanae Takaichi's call for a snap poll sets off the shortest campaign period in its post-war history, just 12 days for political parties to make their case to voters. So how does the political land lie? 1,285 candidates are vying for a spot in the House of Representatives. It's the more powerful of two parliamentary chambers. The 465 lawmakers elected will have an overriding power to pass budgets and choose a prime minister. More than 60% of those seats are being contested in single-member constituencies. That's about 289 members elected first past the post. The remaining 176 will be elected through proportional representation by party list system in 11 regional blocks. In this case, Voters cast ballots for a party, and seats are allocated based on share of the vote the party gains across a given region. A simple majority requires a total of 233 seats. Each member of the House of Representatives serves a 4-year term. But what's at stake? Well, incumbent leader Sanae Takaichi is looking to capitalize on a surge in public support. It's a first test at the ballot box since taking office in October. She took on a battered government, with the party having lost its majority in both houses of parliament. This time, if Takaichi does win a lower house majority, she may still have to govern with a minority in the upper house, which she cannot dissolve. The ruling LDP currently controls 199 seats in the lower house, governing with the support of coalition partner, the Japan Innovation Party, also known as Ishin, which has 34 seats. The election also serving as a first major test for the new party, Centrist Reform Alliance, or CRA, formed through a merger of the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan and the Komeito Party. Komeito ended its long-standing alliance with the LDP last October, making a significant shift in Japan's political landscape. The CRA currently has 172 seats in the chamber. It is a fragmented political scene, but one that the February 8th election has the potential to stabilize for the first time since the second Abe administration that governed Japan for almost 8 years until 2020. For more, we are joined now by Mayu Yoshida, who is tracking developments for CNA from Tokyo. So, Mayu, let's first look at the optics for Ms. Takaichi. We have Trump's endorsement. We have this upcoming visit to the White House in March. And then a day ago, there was a meeting with chipmaker TSMC, signaling some kind of major investment in the country. All of this coming ahead of the election. That bodes well, I mean, reflects well on the Japanese leader, doesn't it?
Well, actually, even if she receives that backing from Donald Trump, it's actually unlikely to directly change how Japanese voters decide, because after all, their biggest concern is rising living costs and sales tax. And that said, though, Takaichi's relationship with Trump does matter when it comes to maintaining this good U.S.-Japan alliance. Keep in mind that Sanae Takaichi already had good working relationship from the very beginning, because she positioned herself as the successor to late Shinzo Abe, who had a very good relationship both on a professional level and a personal level. And back in October, we actually saw Takaichi and Trump signing a document in Tokyo describing the U.S.-Japan alliance as entering a golden era, reaffirming cooperation on security and economic issues. And that partnership is especially important as both countries seek to counter China. Japan-China relations have worsened since Takaichi made comments about Taiwan back in November, which really angered Beijing and led to travel restrictions ahead of the Lunar New Year, which is a headache for Japan because the Lunar New Year is when people from China flock to Japan for a big shopping spree. And if Takaichi, though, secures a stronger mandate in the lower house, it would make it easier for her to push ahead with her own agenda, including policies that have received criticism within her own party, such as higher defense spending. And she has been clear that she wants a more assertive Japan. And that aligns with Trump's view that Tokyo should invest in defense more. So a stronger mandate could also accelerate plans to strengthen Japan's military spending. But on the flip side, it could further strain ties with Beijing.
So, Mayu, there are all these surveys suggesting a landslide win for Ms. Takaichi. But if we look ahead and, if polls were true, what sort of challenges would come next should she get the mandate that she wants?
Well, that's a really good question because aside from diplomatic tensions with China, market players are also worried. Takaichi's decision to call a snap election already rattled financial markets. It triggered a sharp sell-off in long-term Japanese government bonds, and the Japanese yen has been very volatile. The yen sinked after she made surprising comments about that the weak yen could actually be an opportunity for Japanese exporters. And that really surprised the markets because it's very unusual for the prime minister to speak so directly about the currency, especially at a time when many Japanese business leaders are actually urging the Japanese government to address the weak yen. And this is all happening while voters are really feeling the squeeze. The weak yen is pushing up import costs. Wages in Japan have been stagnant compared to other G7 countries, and inflation has been rising for the past few years. And many households feel that their living standards have declined. And to ease that pressure, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi pledged to suspend the 8% consumption tax on food for 2 years, but many economists are actually skeptical. Recent Nikkei survey shows the majority of economists and major think tanks believing that removing that tax on food would only have a limited impact on GDP growth and consumer spending. And instead, the biggest concern is how Japan would pay for all those tax cuts, given that it already carries one of the highest debt burdens among developed economies.
All right, many thanks for that report. Mayu Yoshida covering the story for CNA from Tokyo. All right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea hits a record-breaking current account surplus, powered by a semiconductor export boom. Plus, investors reject Amazon's plans of a massive ramp-up in AI spending. Shares fall sharply. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and we've got Henry standing by with the very latest in business news. So Toyota in the spotlight, apparently seeing its second leadership change in just 3 years. Tell us more about this sudden move.
Well, that's right, Oteli. Well, the Japanese carmaker has had it tough amid Trump tariffs and rising competition from Chinese rivals. Toyota says the reshuffle would help speed up management's decision-making in response to changes in the business environment and improve the firm's earning power. Koji Sato will be stepping down as president and CEO after 3 years. He will be moving over to the vice chairman role and take up the newly established position of chief industry officer. Taking over from Mr. Sato is Kanta Kon, who has been serving as the automaker's chief financial officer. He's widely known to be a trusted lieutenant to the chairman Akio Toyoda, the grandson of Toyota's founder. The changes will be effective in April. The shakeup had not been widely expected and is coinciding with increasing scrutiny on Toyota's buyout of subsidiary Toyota Industries. It has been facing strong pushback from minority investors who are saying that the deal lacks transparency and is greatly underpriced. Toyota says the new structure will allow outgoing CEO Koji Sato to focus on the broader industry, while incoming chief Kanta Kon takes charge of internal management. Mr. Sato has described himself as a car guy, often conducting vehicle tests. Mr. Kon has led cost-cutting and profit improvement efforts. The leadership change comes as Toyota faces rising competition from fast-expanding Chinese EV makers, higher costs, and pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. While the reshuffle was announced alongside the company's earnings report, profits fell on year for both the October-December quarter and the 9 months through December, despite higher sales in both periods. Toyota says the decline was largely due to higher tariff-related costs. Still, the automaker has raised its outlook for the fiscal year ending March 2026 after retaining its crown as the world's top carmaker, with record global sales in 2025. It now expects full-year operating profit of $24 billion, with sales seen rising 4% to about $318 billion. South Korea posting its largest ever current account surplus, surpassing the previous record set a decade ago, driven by strong semiconductor exports. Both the current and goods accounts rose more than 20% on year, while exports hit a new record of $718 billion. The Bank of Korea staying optimistic on its outlook for this year, saying it expects the current account to remain solid despite uncertainties from the U.S. tariffs. South Korea pledged $350 billion in U.S. investment last year to ease tariffs, but volatile moves in the won have since raised concerns that such a large outflow could further destabilize the currency. While shares of the world's largest pig breeder logged modest gains in its Hong Kong debut, Mu Yuan closing around 4% higher after opening flat, trading at the offer price of 39 Hong Kong dollars. Well, the tepid trade largely in line with negative sentiment seen in Hong Kong and broader Asian markets after recent routes in technology-linked shares. And Mu Yuan's listing is Hong Kong Exchange's biggest so far this year, raising some $1.4 billion. The company is looking to use more than half of the proceeds to move into overseas markets. Its CFO saying it's eyeing to expand into Southeast Asia with the next 3 to 5 years. Now, this comes as pork prices in China fall due to oversupply and shrinking demand, with authorities summoning the country's pig breeders last September to discuss cutting production there. Switzerland-based agrochemical group Syngenta is reportedly looking to list on the Hong Kong exchange, a move which could raise up to $10 billion for the company. Syngenta is owned by Chinese state-owned Sinochem and produces seeds and pesticides. If the listing goes through and it raises $10 billion, it would be the third largest globally in the last 5 years. 2 years ago, the company scrapped plans to list in Shanghai, citing industry environment and weakness in China's equity market. Equities in the region ending the week pressured by concerns over stretched valuations in the tech arena and cost of the artificial intelligence boom. Global sell-off in technology shares and sharp losses in silver futures dampening investor sentiment on the mainland, while Shanghai Composite Index and Shenzhen Index both ending the day in the red. Losses in Hong Kong were steeper, with the benchmark Hang Seng Index closing down by a pace of 1.2%. Well, the city's tech shares tracking their global peers as shares of U.S. companies expanded their tumble for a 7th straight session. And checking Alibaba shares now closing today's trading session down by about 2.9%, Tencent off by about 2%, while Baidu down by 2.2%. Japan's Nikkei managing to recover from early losses to end the day in the green, while the benchmark Nikkei 225 index rising by a pace of 0.8%. While Taiwanese stocks were largely unchanged, while South Korean shares snapping a 6-week rally, closing down by a pace of 1.4%, despite posting a record current account surplus in December. Now, major AI plays in Asia fell as the AI-fueled rally starts to lose steam. South Korean chip stock Samsung Electronics ending today's trading session down by less than 0.5%, while SK Hynix down by similar margin as well. Japan's Advantest closing up by more than 1.1%. Amazon shares tanking more than 9% in pre-market trade after U.S. tech giant unveiled plans for a massive increase in AI spending despite a strong fourth quarter report. Well, the company expects to spend $200 billion in 2026, nearly 60% more than last year. The market reaction highlights growing anxiety over excess spending, and Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta are expected to collectively pour more than $700 billion into capital spending this year. Alphabet's spending plans triggered a similar sell-off yesterday. Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are said to lose a combined $900 billion in market value since filing their quarterly earnings over the past week. With the data center costs rising faster than revenue, investors fear tech firms are spending too aggressively. Still, Amazon remains upbeat following its fourth quarter results. Net profit for the December period came in at $21.2 billion. That's in line with expectations and up nearly 6% on year. Revenue climbed by a pace of 14% to $213 billion, with Amazon Web Services up 24%. And analysts say the results show big tech isn't easing off on heavy AI investment. They come as Amazon continues to trim its workforce. The company says it will cut about 16,000 corporate jobs after layoffs roughly 14,000 staff last October. A potential mega merger in the mining sector between Rio Tinto and Glencore has been called off after both parties failed to reach a deal on valuations. Rio Tinto walked away from the deal as it was unable to justify the premium it would need to pay Glencore for the merger. For its part, Glencore's board highlighted concerns over governance as Rio Tinto sought to retain control of both chairman and the CEO roles in the combined entity. The deal would have created the world's largest mining company and allowed Rio Tinto to roughly double its existing copper output. Rio Tinto shares in Australia edged lower, while Glencore shares fell 2.6% in London, recovering from a more than 10% slide following the announcement. Well, the future of flight is on display at the Singapore Airshow, and Chinese firms are out in force, involved in everything from passenger jets and medical aircraft to cargo drones and even next-generation fighter aircraft. Let's take a closer look.
Chinese aviation firms are pulling out all the stops at this year's Singapore Airshow, with aerial displays, gleaming aircraft, scale models, mock cockpits, and hands-on tech that feel closer to a theme park than a trade fair. One crowd magnet, COMAC, widely seen as China's homegrown challenger to Airbus and Boeing. Alongside its headline C919 jet, it's also showcasing medically configured aircraft for the first time in Southeast Asia, fitted with eye diagnostic and surgical facilities. But the real buzz here isn't just about passenger jets, it's about autonomous aircraft.
Southeast Asia is where Chinese drone makers see demand will take off. And the region's disaster risks mean aircraft like this can be lifesavers, not just delivery tools. And with a supply chain almost entirely based in China, manufacturers say they can keep flying high, even as global aerospace shortages clip others' wings.
因为东南亚国家丛林和海岛众多，这个对物资的快速运输呢，有一个天然的一个需求。所以呢，我们连续2次参加新加坡航展，也是借助这个航展的这个平台，去结识更多的这个运营公司，还有一些潜在的用户，也挖掘更多的场景。现在呢，我们已经开拓了包括印度尼西亚、泰国，然后还有这个也包括南亚的马尔代夫这些国家的市场。
These large fixed-wing cargo drones are built for tough terrain, from high plateaus to isolated islands, places where roads don't go and runways can be rudimentary. All this is unfolding against a tense geopolitical backdrop. Washington's posture towards China-made drones has hardened, and while some proposed US restrictions were recently shelved, friction in the sector remains a risk. Chinese firms, though, sound unfazed.
面对这个国际的竞争，首先就是我们通过这个合法合理的途径出来；二呢，就是我们的产品要有足够的优势，像大载重长航时这样的产品，目前国际上来讲，无人机的产品我们还是遥遥领先的，就是整个的这个竞品还是比较少的。
Still, China's aviation industry isn't fully self-reliant, especially in high-end jet engines and avionics. And export controls add extra turbulence to that journey. Executives say deeper regional tech ties are part of the answer.
我们已经进入到一个科技的一个时代，我们中国的话，在整个亚太地区跟周围的国家，然后有非常深刻的联系，不仅是在技术的影响力也好，还是在产品的输出也好。 还是在供应链的与周边国家的协作也好，我们都可以看到，近些年来互动是越来越频繁。
And it's not only civilian hardware on display. On the defense side, AVIC is showcasing a large model of its J-35A fighter, pitching it internationally as a more affordable alternative to Lockheed Martin's F-35. So from stealth fighters to cargo drones to air ambulances, China's aviation industry is making sure its presence here is anything but low profile, as it works to prove it can be a competitor in the international stage.
And that's all for business. Otelli, back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Henry. Well, on that note, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Hong Kong to sentence former media tycoon Jimmy Lai next week, following his long-running national security trial. 78-year-old could face life in prison. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. U.S. President Donald Trump endorses Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi less than 2 days before a national election, as polls point to a landslide win for the nation's first female premier, riding a youth-led wave of popularity. Toyota reshuffles its leadership, citing an urgent need to accelerate decision-making after the world's largest carmaker reported a slump in quarterly profit amid persistent headwinds from Trump's tariffs and competition from China. And the United Nations reportedly allowing sanction exemptions for humanitarian aid to North Korea after South Korea-led efforts, as Seoul continues its push for rapprochement with Pyongyang. Yonhap and AFP news agency, both citing diplomatic sources, report that the exemptions will be granted by the UN Security Council Sanctions Committee on North Korea after South Korea-led efforts. And the waiver covers 17 projects led by South Korea, the US, and other international organizations. A senior South Korean official had earlier hinted at new developments following talks between Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington. Now, the exemption is expected to allow more aid, such as nutritional supplements, medical equipment, and water purification systems into the country that's facing chronic food shortages and an economy crippled by the sanctions. A South Korean foreign ministry official told AFP news agency that it hopes that Pyongyang would respond positively to Seoul's efforts for peaceful coexistence on the Korean peninsula. South Korea's Lee Jae-myung administration has been actively reaching out to North Korea since last year, but it has been an uphill task, with Pyongyang repeatedly rebuffing Seoul's efforts. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump as well, failing to secure a meeting with Kim Jong-un when he was in South Korea last October. Conditions in Pyongyang also in focus. Elizabeth Salmon, the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korean human rights, is in Seoul, and she says it's now nearly impossible for citizens to leave North Korea. She notes a drop in escapee numbers has made it much harder to learn about conditions on the ground. 2 other human rights groups have also raised concerns. Now, Human Rights Watch, in a report that Pyongyang's surveillance and crackdowns on its people have intensified inequality. It also spotlighted a ramp-up in border security, with soldiers guarding the North's border with China ordered to unconditionally shoot anyone leaving without permission. Amnesty International, citing North Koreans who do successfully flee, warned that the situation at home has worsened dramatically. In testimony from North Korean escapees, they say people, even children in the country, are being sent to labor camps and exposed to public humiliation for consuming South Korean media. Some may even face the death penalty. Well, for more insights, we are joined now by Professor Roo Yong-wook, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy from National University of Singapore. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. First, I thought we'll begin talking about those exemptions on North Korea. Apparently, they were struck for months, and then they were suddenly cleared, right? You know, as officials hint at all these supposedly new developments. So, Professor, help us understand what most likely changed behind the scenes.
You know, ever since there was a change of government in South Korea from the conservatives to the progressives, there's some change in South Korea's approach to North Korea, including human rights policy. So the previous conservative government adopted a policy of generating maximum pressure on North Korea, whereas the current progressive Lee government would like to separate humanitarian projects away from other political issues. And the Trump administration, in the meantime, has also sought to improve its ties with North Korea, renew negotiations with Pyongyang. And all these things have come together now to lead to this sanctions exemption for humanitarian projects in North Korea.
Now, when it comes to the big picture question, or when you look at North Korea as a whole today, what do you think is the single most important a way that the human rights picture has shifted in the last few years? I mean, what has changed and what hasn't?
Well, you know, North Korea is one of the most repressive regimes around the world, with widespread suppression and violation of human rights. And ever since the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has begun reporting annual reports on North Korea's human rights conditions in 2014, unfortunately, the human rights situation in North Korea has not improved. And in fact, in many areas, it has worsened with widespread crackdown of political dissidents, increasing use of death penalty, as well as a tightening control of foreign information in North Korea. And all these things have taken place in greater isolation of Pyongyang from the rest of the world. And therefore, all in all, there has been very little progress on human rights in North Korea, and that's been really unfortunate.
And not to mention now with the new, with the regime using all this new technology like cameras, facial recognition, it seems like defecting is nearly impossible now. So help us understand then, what, as North Korea's ties with the key partners deepen, what leverage is there? I mean, realistically, in terms of how the international community's ability to push for human rights and push for accountability?
It has always been difficult for international human rights bodies to improve human rights conditions in these target states because global human rights mechanisms do not actually have any enforcement power. So therefore, they need to work with national governments in order to improve human rights conditions in precisely those countries where national governments suppress human rights. Now, in the case of North Korea, in the past, either Russia or China provided some avenue of generating pressure on Pyongyang on human rights issues. So when great powers were on better terms than they are now, they could approach either Russia or China to put pressure on Pyongyang to do more about human rights. Now, ever since geopolitical tensions have intensified in the recent years, that avenue of creating pressure on Pyongyang has pretty much disappeared as we've seen closer political alignment of communist countries, right, between China, Russia, and North Korea. And therefore, it has become harder for global human rights institutions to do anything positive to improve human rights conditions in North Korea.
Do you also think major powers like the US under the Trump administration, do you think that's also weakening the human rights system from the inside?
Yeah, for sure. We've witnessed the strengthening of authoritarian tendencies, not just in authoritarian and communist countries, but also in democratic countries in recent years. So national governments appear to give less priority to the promotion and protection of human rights than before. And hence it has become much more difficult for global human rights institutions to work with these national governments to achieve their objectives of promoting human rights. But at the same time, in my view, I think global human rights mechanisms have their own issues. So for instance, the UN Human Rights Council is so politicized that it has become little more than a venue where national governments come and launch attacks on some other countries that they don't like. So while these human rights institutions cannot manage geopolitics, I think they can do certain things to improve the way they conduct human rights businesses in their own discussions.
So in other words, what does accountability actually look like now? I mean, who's enforcing it and through what channels would be most effective?
So the enforcement has always mainly relied on the national governments because we live in a system of sovereign nation states. But as I said earlier, it's oftentimes that precise national governments that's violating and suppressing human rights. And yet global institutions, civil society groups must work with these national governments to improve human rights conditions in those states. And as you can see, it's not easy, but that's pretty much the only and most salient ways to improve human rights in current geopolitical intensification.
Well, many thanks for joining us this Friday evening, Professor Roo Young-wook from National University of Singapore. A former Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai will be sentenced on Monday. The founder of the now defunct Apple Daily newspaper was found guilty of foreign collusion in December under the city's sweeping national security law imposed by Beijing. The 78-year-old was also found guilty of one count of seditious publication and could face life in prison. He will be sentenced alongside 8 co-defendants, including 6 Apple Daily executives. Lai pleaded not guilty to all charges, while the others all entered guilty pleas, which could help them get reduced sentences. Well, his conviction sparked international outcry, with a number of Western leaders slamming it. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, for instance, urged for Lai, a UK citizen, to be released during his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping last month. The US and the European Union have also called for his release. Well, China hit back at foreign criticism, saying that comments amount to a smearing of Hong Kong's judicial systems. Hong Kong, meanwhile, says the case has nothing to do with freedom of speech. Staying in Hong Kong, a rash of fires in a city has left at least one person injured. The fire service department says it extinguished a blaze at a wholesale fish market in Kowloon. An unconscious man was taken to hospital for emergency treatment. Authorities say they received multiple reports of a truck suddenly bursting into flames at about 3 p.m. local time. The fire spread rapidly, completely destroying 8 nearby vehicles. Well, early at about 4 a.m. local time, a barge carrying recycled metal caught fire at a cargo area, also in Kowloon. Firefighters launched a joint marine and land operation to put out the blaze. Police say the cause remains under investigation, though initial checks found no evidence of criminal activities. A lawmaker says this is the second such incident at the site in less than a week. About 400 passengers were evacuated from an MTR train on the Tuen Ma line this morning after a portable power bank caught fire. Video from social media showed the train carriages filling up with smoke and at least one commuter using a fire extinguisher to put out the blaze. No injuries were reported. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, what Japanese authorities are doing to manage crowds at one of the country's most iconic landmarks. And a fast-rising Ukrainian sumo star takes aim at the top prize for Japan's national sport. Media polls suggest Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's ruling coalition is on track to gain seats. But shifting alliances, funding scandals, and uncertainty over economic policies are adding unpredictability to Japan's rare winter election. CNA's senior correspondent Michio Ishida has more.
Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi kicked off her 12-day election campaign in Tokyo's Akihabara district. It's where her mentor, the late leader Shinzo Abe, often hosted his own rallies. But her ruling Liberal Democratic Party faces a very different political landscape heading into Sunday's polls.
大きな政策転換をしました。それは日本維新の会との連立に変わったから。その肝が責任ある積極財政です。
The LDP's fledgling coalition with the Japan Innovation Party formed in October will be up against another new tie-up. The centrist Reform Alliance was set up in January through the merger of former LDP partner Komeito, backed by Buddhist organization Soka Gakkai, and the largest opposition Constitutional Democratic Party, which has the support of labor unions.
生活を守るという意味でも、また平和を守るという意味でも重要だと、こういうふうに位置づけて中道の塊ができるその第一歩の選挙になれば、私はそれなりに意義のある選挙になるのではないか。
Komeito withdrew from the ruling coalition soon after Ms. Takaichi became LDP president in October. It cited concerns over LDP's slush fund scandal, which was seen as a key reason for a string of defeats at the polls.
The electoral results have been catastrophic. And so they are generally worried that if they get stuck with the LDP and they continue with the LDP, they are going to lose, and tainted because of the association with the LDP, which is scandal-ridden. I think they have been generally jarred by Takaichi and her policy stance, very anti-China, which Komeito has been traditionally close to.
Recent media polls, though, show the centrist Reform Alliance lagging behind the LDP coalition in public support. And while the approval rating of Ms. Takaichi's cabinet has slid from its peak, according to some surveys, it continues to hover around 60%, higher than many of her predecessors. Whether the popularity of Japan's first female prime minister will translate into votes for her party is a key question heading into the polls.
はっ きり言う人とか裏表ない人に投票したいなと思います。
議論はもうたくさんしてきましたし、もう今度は動き出すというところを一番期待しているし。
By calling a snap election, Ms. Takaichi is seeking a stronger mandate for a ruling coalition, which held a razor-thin majority in the lower house before it was dissolved last month.
In spite of her image as a very strong woman leader, she's among the weakest prime ministers of Japan ever in terms of parliamentary support. When it comes to passing the budget, passing bills that are controversial, she doesn't have the numbers.
Ms. Takaichi wants to push through expansionary fiscal policies to spur growth. With rising costs of living taking center stage ahead of the elections, she has also pledged to suspend an 8% sales tax on food items for 2 years, similar to most party platforms that also advocate tax cuts. But some have questioned the fiscal sustainability of such moves and the impact on tax-funded social welfare.
国が保つとは思えないんで、そうすると何か別なことでの増税が今度次にやってくるんじゃないかなとは思います。自
分が将来就職する時とかを考えて、社会保険だったり手取りだったりそっちの点を重視したいかなと思います。
Ms. Takaichi has vowed to resign if a ruling Liberal Democratic Party and its coalition partner, the Japan Innovation Party, together fail to win a majority in the February polls. If that happens, the LDP will have to hold an election to choose a new party leader, and both houses of parliament must elect a new prime minister. Michio Ishida, Sanae, Tokyo.
We've got more coverage on the upcoming election, including this article on what's behind the rise of the right-wing party, Sanseto, and its potential impact on the political scene. You can check it out on our website, cna.asia, or on our mobile app. Well, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is hoping her election win can get her the mandate she needs to run the country. It's her style, not just her brand of politics, that's gaining unprecedented popularity. Well, the handbag she carries sold out. The pen she uses is going viral. And even her favorite snacks are in hot demand.
話題にしていただいてから日本国内だけでなく海外の方からもかなりご注文いただいてまして、それで約9ヶ月ほどお待ちいただく状態になっております。
Ms. Takaichi's social media following dwarfs those of her rivals and even her predecessors. Analysts say it's no surprise why, though they warn that popularity doesn't always translate into votes.
Actually, being more popular than the past leaders of the LDP is not so difficult, given that all of them, not even most of them, but all of them, have been middle-aged, boring men, or even elderly, boring men. And therefore, they had this very stagnant image that were not very communicative and were harder to understand. And so in some ways, Takaichi, cut a fresh image.
While popularity may sometimes boost political fortunes, it is also creating challenges elsewhere in Japan. Mount Fuji, for instance, may be postcard perfect, but lately it's become problematic. A cherry blossom season is one of Japan's most magical moments. It will soon be the time of year when hundreds of thousands of visitors descend on the country to catch a glimpse of those famous pink blooms. But in one town near Mount Fuji, such crowds have become too much. The Cherry Blossom Festival in the city of Fuji Yoshida has been cancelled, with officials citing a crisis caused by over-tourism. Well, the area is hugely popular, offering picture-perfect views of Mount Fuji, framed by cherry trees, with no shortage of Instagram-worthy photo spots. Residents say an influx of badly behaved tourists has made life so unbearable. From a chronic traffic congestion to littering, some locals report tourists have gone as far as defecating in private gardens. So authorities have decided to bring down the curtain on the 10-year-old festival. The event may be cancelled, but the town is bracing for crowds anyway, with the venue still expected to draw large numbers. A Ukrainian sumo wrestler that has taken the traditional sport by storm is going after its top prize. The 21-year-old Danilo Yefushin, who goes by the sumo name of Ionishiki Arata, logged his second straight championship win in January at the New Year Grand Sumo tournament held in Tokyo. Such back-to-back wins are considered rare feats achieved only by the very best. But Ionishiki isn't stopping here. He is aiming for the top rank of Yokozuna after being promoted at record speed to sumo's second highest rank of Ozeki just months ago.
やっぱ強くなりたい、番付1枚でも上げたいっていう気持ちで毎日起きて今でもやってますんで、やっぱ辛いことしないと上はいかないというのは基本のことなんで、それを乗り越えればもう自分の仕事です。
A third victory at next month's spring tournament would make him eligible for that highly elusive promotion, only achieved by 75 others over the past 300 years. Ionishiki's rapid rise has drawn intense scrutiny, both in Japan and Ukraine, but that is also amping up the pressure for him to live up to expectations.
ウクライナにいる友達だったり、当時の先生とかだったりもみんなすごく思った以上に相撲を見てくれてて、優勝した時もやっぱ普通に勝つ時もすぐ連絡が来たりとか、すごくなんていうんですか、もっと頑張らないといけないなという気持ちがなりますね。
Well, Ionishiki's popularity comes amid a renewed surge in interest in sumo, both locally and abroad. Bi-monthly tournaments sell out almost immediately. North Korea opened its National Winter Games this week, held at a sports village in Samjeon, an area near the Chinese border. And more than 50 events have been scheduled in 5 winter sports that include ice hockey, figure skating, and skiing. Well, sports clubs from state bodies and major industrial sites from the participant lineup. North Korean athletes are not participating at this year's Winter Olympics in Italy, which begins today, as they did not secure qualification spots. They last took part in the 2018 South Korea Winter Olympics, where it sent 22 athletes and even formed a joint women's ice hockey team with South Korea. Pyongyang held back its overseas participation during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was later suspended from the International Olympic Committee until the end of 2022. After deciding not to send a team to the Tokyo Summer Olympics. And that wraps up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia and find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.